In this video, I am going to fix trouble codes P06DD and P0128 in my 2015 SXT Challenger Plus. This is the diagnostic scan tool that I use. I use it in all my vehicles and it works great. It's a Bluetooth device, so you do have to purchase this application to go with it, but it works great. I've been pretty happy with it. This is what it looks like. Diagnoses the codes really well, gives you some basic information to go with it, and it does some other cool features as well. For me, the P06DD, all it means is the car needs oil. I'm about halfway through an oil change, and my car just happens to consume a lot of oil, and by the time this trouble code shows up, it needs about 2 quarts of oil. So check your dipstick, add a quart of oil. I continue to use the 5W20 conventional, which is what the manufacturer recommends. I've been good. This car just seems to consume oil. So again, when that light shows up, I got to put about 2 quarts, maybe 1.5 quarts in to get it back to the proper level. So that's it. Reset the code, and that works for me. Now P0128, I have discovered that the thermostat is stuck and it's not reaching the desired temperature. So thanks to the lovely folks of YouTube, I learned that this is an easy fix, and I figured out how to do it, did some research here and there, put it together. So I'm going to share with you what I learned, and this worked. This was the fix for this car. Thermostat's right there in the front of the engine. I just went down to my local AutoZone and purchased this thermostat. This thermostat's about $22. That's the model number. And the thermostat comes inside the whole housing. So all we're going to be doing is removing 2 bolts and a hose and replacing that whole piece right there. And that did fix this problem. So $22 for that piece there. Then it was also about $20 for the Chrysler recommended antifreeze, 50/50. And then I purchased some chemical resistant rubber gloves because I leased my rubber gloves with an option to buy. So before I got started, I found some old cardboard to put underneath the car, because once you remove the thermostat, coolant is going to start leaking out, and I don't want that all over the driveway. I also tried to fit a oil pan underneath to catch some of the coolant. You might have to jack the car up for that. So you can do this with some basic tools, because I got 99 problems and a 10mm ain't one. 10mm socket for those 2 bolts. I got this little hose clamp, which I might use. Some channel locks or vice grips to get the spring clamp off, and then I needed a screwdriver just to get my air intake off, but that's about it. It's pretty simple. Don't really need anything special. You do need to start with taking the engine cover off. There's about 5 like grommets that just pops off. So carefully put your hand underneath and feel for those grommets, and there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 spots, and it's just like a little ball that pushes into a socket, and it just pops off. No tools required. You just gently, kind of carefully pop it off, because you don't want to crack your engine cover. You may need to remove some sensors, some airflow sensors for your air intake. So, and I just moved it enough, about 90% of it, just enough to move it out of the way so that I could access the thermostat, so I can get easy access to it. So it's still partially connected, but just moved out of the way. So now we can get started. So I'm going to put this hose clamp on that major coolant hose right there, because some coolant might be left in there. Something that I did that I didn't see other people doing was put some towels over the belts and some towels and rags in there to collect the coolant that spills. bunch of coolant's going to come flowing out once you remove this. And so I put some rags down there just to collect the coolant that spills out, and also I covered up the serpentine belt because I don't want coolant just all over the other parts of my car that don't need to be. I don't know why people didn't do that, but I also thought it was necessary to have some paper towels standing by. So here we go, we're ready. I got everything covered up, and you just take your 10mm wrench and loosen these two bolts. There's one on the bottom, and then there's one on the top. And there's the first one. Put that aside, you're going to reuse them later. Here comes the top one. And again, they're just about hand tight. They should come off real easy. And you're going to reuse these bolts in a moment to put it back together. All right, there's the second one. And as it loosens up and starts to come apart, all right, there's some coolant leaking out already. I'm just going to throw some towels down there to help absorb some of that coolant. I'm just trying to minimize as much spillage as I can because it's going to leak through down the bottom of the car, and I don't want that on the driveway. I don't want my dog licking it by accident. So 2 bolts are out of that thermostat, and look, it just comes right off. The coolant is spilling out, being absorbed by my rags, and that's it. So, oh no, that's not it. You need to then shimmy this spring clamp down. I'm going to get that out of the way. You need to compress that spring clamp, move it down out of the way so that it's off of that part of the thermostat, and this will just gently twist out. All right. And that's it. All right, that's out. And now we're just going to do the reverse to put it back together here. So what to do with that? Here, let's put that out of the way. Let's see what the new one looks like. Oh, here. Don't forget to remove that O-ring that gets stuck in there. Then the new one has that O-ring attached to it, and when you remove it, it gets stuck in there. So don't forget to remove that little rubber ring. All right, there's comparison. Great. Looks a little different, but it's apparently the same thing. And I haven't had a problem, so it works. All right. Put that end in the hose. Don't put the spring clamp back on yet, because you need a little bit of freedom to get it in the right position. So line it up as best you can. Make sure it's seated in there properly. I'm going to get one of the screws ready, and I'm just going to get it seated and kind of hand tighten the first bolt so it sits in there, and then go and get the second bolt underneath and just screw that in till it's hand tight as well. Now you'll notice there are little metal pieces where the bolt holes are, and that's going to help you from crushing the plastic, but you only need to kind of just hand tighten these. I could not find torque specifications on these bolts, so I just tightened them as snug as I could without, you don't want to He-Man it and break the plastic. So, I'm just going to go as snug as possible. Now, something I also did, I did a little bit on the top bolt and then went and did a little bit on the bottom bolt. And I kind of go back and forth between the top bolt and the bottom bolt so that I get an even kind of torque on it, or an even kind of compression when I'm installing the part. So a few turns on the top, a few turns on the bottom, and I just went back and forth periodically checking just to make sure that it's seated properly in there. And you know, you gotta use your judgment, and just don't go crazy. I went real slow and just did it until it was as snug as possible without like over cranking, because obviously you don't want anything leaking out, and you don't want to over crank to risk breaking your plastic. So, all right. And again, by going back and forth between top and bottom, you're kind of assuring that there's even torque, you know, on both sides of the piece. So that feels pretty good. And now I think we can go and get our spring clamp back on. So channel locks to open up that clamp, and I'm just going to shimmy that back to its original position. You do want to make sure that it's attached where the plastic part is. You know, it's securing creating a seal between the rubber and the plastic there. There's usually an indentation that you can find of where it was, and as long as your housing is in the hose enough, you know, to seat that back to its original position. So I did hear that vice grips, it's a good place to use vice grips for these. That might be a good thing to try next time, but make sure that that's seated in there firmly. And then I'm just going to check everything and go ahead and start cleaning up. Like, that's it, we're done. You know, I'm just going to clean up, put everything back together, and check for leaks. All right, I'm going to wipe off the belts. I don't know why you want coolant spilling all over your belts. Like, maybe you won't, I don't know. So you know, it's a little bit wet down there, but again, like, put some rags down there to help, you know, absorb that. Top off your coolant reservoir while the engine is cold. And I'm going to start the car and let it run, and then I'm going to go check for leaks. Everything seems to look good. I'm going to get a little flashlight in there, make sure I don't see any like preliminary leaking at this point, make sure all my connections were good. I do have I'm able to see the thermostat because of my air intake, so your situation might be different. But everything looks good here, so I think I'm going to clean up and go for a test drive. First, I'm going to reset the codes with my application, and everything is reset. And go for a little test drive. Everything seemed to drive good. You can also look at your coolant temperature on your dash. It should read around 200 degrees. But after my test drive, I'm going to come back and again check for leaks. Everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that air filter and reinstall that. And that's it. We are done. I am so relieved. I saved a ton of money at the dealership, and I get the satisfaction of knowing that I did it myself. So thanks for watching. Keep on rocking. And the next day I did come back out and re-top off the expansion tank. And it's been good. I have had no issues since.